What if the world you think you know was built on top of secrets so dark that entire civilizations worked tirelessly to erase them? This unsettling question becomes even heavier when we dive into the hidden scandals of the ancient Phoenician temples, places often remembered for trade, navigation, and cultural brilliance, but rarely for the shadows that moved behind their sacred walls. When we peel back the layers of myth, we begin to sense something deeper, something the ancient scribes chose, not to record, something whispered only in the dim corridors of temple chambers where power and fear intertwined. To understand these forgotten truths, we must step into a world where religion was not merely a spiritual guide, but an instrument of absolute control. The Phoenician clergy knew how to weave devotion, secrecy, and authority into a single fabric, creating a system where rituals shaped politics and sacred vows dictated the fate of entire families. Many imagined temples as peaceful sanctuaries, yet within these stone structures flowed intense rivalries, forbidden practices, and quiet punishments executed far from public eyes. When we explore the foundations of these temples, the silence itself seems to carry warnings left by those who once suffered under the weight of hidden doctrines. There is something magnetic about these forbidden narratives. Perhaps it is the contrast between the grand maritime achievements of Phoenician culture and the concealed world of spirituals, manipulation lying beneath. Or maybe it is the realization that behind every ceremony, every offering, every divine invocation, there existed a network of priests guarding knowledge that could either elevate or destroy. This duality makes the Phoenician temples a powerful symbol of how sacred authority can be twisted when secrecy becomes more valuable than truth. As we advance, imagine walking through a narrow passage illuminated only by the flicker of oil lamps, hearing distant chants echo through the stone. The air is heavy, not only with incense, but with tension, carrying the weight of scandals that never reached the official records. What you are about to uncover challenges the polished image of ancient Phoenician spirituality and forces us to confront the darker motivations hidden behind religious prestige. You may find that some of these revelations touch something familiar, something that echoes through time in ways we rarely acknowledge. You ever felt that history hides more than it reveals? The next steps in this exploration may be even more unsettling. And before we go further, share your thoughts in the comments, especially if something in this opening stirred your curiosity or made you question what you thought you knew about ancient religions. Your perspective matters here. Also, make sure to leave a like and check if you are already subscribed to the channel so you do not miss anything as we uncover even deeper secrets that scholars rarely discuss. Let this be our starting point, a quiet doorway opening into a much darker chamber that we are only beginning to enter as the shadows ahead grow denser and the narrative leads us deeper into what was never meant to be exposed. As we move deeper into the hidden corridors of the Phoenician temples, the first veil lifts over the inner structure that shaped every decision, every ritual, every whispered command of the priestly elite. Behind the public ceremonies that merchants and travelers admired stood a far more intricate system, a layered network of clerics, attendants, and initiates bound by oaths so strict that breaking them was believed to invite divine punishment. These early layers of secrecy reveal how the clergy consolidated power, not by force alone, but through carefully engineered mystique, symbolic authority, and psychological influence woven into the very architecture of the sacred complexes. The novices who entered these temples did so under the belief that they were approaching enlightenment, yet the road ahead often demanded obedience before knowledge, fear before understanding. Their training rarely involved spiritual wisdom at first. Instead, they learned the hierarchy, the coded gestures, the rigid protocols that allowed the priestly class to maintain its grip over the masses. This internal system resembled a living organism, with each rank feeding information upward, creating a chain of dependence that ensured loyalty. The higher one ascended, the more the rituals transformed from symbolic acts into powerful tools designed to enforce submission or elevate chosen individuals. Within these inner walls, rituals served dual purposes. They honored the gods, yes, but they also shaped the minds of participants. Certain ceremonies, reserved only for the most trusted members, involved sensory deprivation, hypnotic chanting, or symbolic punishments meant to test the resolve of initiates. These practices were rarely documented, leaving only faint, echoes in fragmented inscriptions and foreign accounts that hint at ceremonies far more intense than what the official religious texts describe. Such rituals fostered a climate where doubt became dangerous, curiosity required caution, and loyalty was rewarded with deeper access to the temple's hidden knowledge. It was within these internal dynamics that the earliest scandals took root. The power imbalance between ranks allowed certain members to manipulate others, creating silent victims who could not speak, bound both by spiritual fear and by the authority the clergy projected. Even the most devout followers sometimes realized too late that the temple's offerings to the gods masked a system where secrecy was a currency, one traded for influence, protection, or favored rituals. The formation of this elite circle created an environment where those inside the highest tier navigated a world shaped by privilege and peril, while those below walked a tightrope between spiritual aspiration and the threat of unseen consequences. Understanding these internal layers is essential because they serve as the foundation upon which the most shocking scandals of the Phoenician religious world would later unfold. The deeper we move into this structure, the clearer it becomes that what the world sees as ancient spiritual tradition was, behind closed doors, an elaborate mechanism built to preserve authority at any cost, leaving behind traces of tension that still whisper from the stones long after the chants have faded. As the layers of secrecy within the Phoenician temples continued to unfold, we encounter a more sinister dimension of control, how the clergy manipulated not only the spiritual devotion of their followers, but also the social and political structures surrounding these sacred spaces. Power within the temples extended beyond incense, altars, and sacred texts. It permeated the lives of the people who relied on the clergy for guidance, judgment, and even survival. Through a carefully orchestrated combination of fear, reverence, and subtle intimidation, the temple hierarchy maintained dominance over those who might otherwise challenge the authority of the priesthood or question the hidden practices that governed every ritual. The mechanisms of control were multifaceted. Initiates learned early that obedience was absolute and visibility limited. The priesthood cultivated an environment in which questioning was not only discouraged, but interpreted as an offense against divine will. Punishments, often symbolic, were administered discreetly. A misplaced offering, a mispronounced chant, or even a look of doubt could result in days of isolation, ritualized penance, or public humiliation cloaked in ceremonial purpose. These methods reinforced a rigid social structure in which each individual's position was monitored, measured, and maintained by a combination of tradition and psychological influence. Beneath the veneer of religious sanctity, rivalries flourished. High-ranking priests, aware of their own precarious positions, often engaged in clandestine negotiations, secret alliances, and calculated acts of sabotage designed to ensure personal advancement. Information was currency, and the ability to manipulate perception became as important as mastery of ritual knowledge. The system rewarded those who could navigate the shadows, while punishing those who misstepped in ways that were invisible to outsiders, but devastating. Internally, stories of disappearances, sudden demotions, and the mysterious fall of promising clerics circulated among the temple initiates, whispered in corners where the lamps cast long, trembling shadows. In addition to internal maneuvering, the clergy used spiritual authority as a tool to extend influence over the surrounding communities. Temples often functioned as centers of political mediation, economic regulation, and social arbitration, meaning that priests could enforce compliance under the guise of divine law. Allegiances were bought and maintained through fear of divine retribution, knowledge of forbidden secrets, and carefully timed revelations of sacred knowledge. In essence, the priests' understanding of human psychology was as refined as their religious training. Every ritual, every punishment, every reward was calibrated to reinforce their supremacy. This interplay of spiritual devotion and political manipulation created an ecosystem in which hidden scandals were inevitable. Priests wielded authority to protect themselves, to control aspirants, and to manage the complex web of interactions between temple and city. Even the most devout acolytes, unaware of the full extent of these secret dynamics, became participants in a system that blurred the line between sacred duty and human exploitation. As we move forward, these concealed practices reveal how the Phoenician clergy cultivated an environment in which obedience was inextricably linked to survival, setting the stage for the extreme rituals and punishments that would later shock even those initiated into their sacred circles. As we delve further into the hidden practices of the Phoenician temples, The veil lifts on rituals that were deliberately obscured even from most initiates, ceremonies so extreme that they blurred the boundaries between devotion and control. Within these sacred chambers, the priests conducted rites that combined sacred symbolism with calculated psychological pressure, enforcing loyalty while simultaneously testing the limits of fear and obedience. It is within this delicate and dangerous balance that the most controversial actions of the clergy took shape, often leaving behind victims whose experiences were never documented in official chronicles. Every candlelit corridor, every stone inscribed with cryptic symbols became a stage for ceremonies designed to instill awe, reverence, and submission. Among the most hidden were rites that demanded public's humility and private suffering. Initiates and lower-ranking attendants were sometimes forced to participate in acts of penance that were physically and emotionally taxing, structured to reinforce hierarchy while instilling fear of disobedience. These practices were cloaked in religious language, framed as tests of devotion, yet for many, the line between spiritual discipline and abuse became impossible to distinguish. The priests knew that secrecy amplified power. The more that rituals were hidden from public scrutiny, the more unquestionable their authority became. This control extended beyond the temple walls, influencing families, communities, and political allies who relied on the clergy's favor for survival. At the same time, the hierarchy within the temple itself became a breeding ground for intrigue. Higher-ranking priests exploited the vulnerability of newcomers, orchestrating ceremonies that punished, humiliated, or manipulated under the guise of divine will. Allegiances shifted in whispers. Loyalties were bought and coerced, and initiates learned that knowledge came at a cost. Obedience first, understanding second. The rituals often involved symbolic sacrifices, strict fasting, and enforced silence, leaving participants in a state of constant tension. Even small mistakes were noted, recorded in coded documents or oral traditions, creating a system where the memory of failure was leveraged to maintain compliance and deter dissent. The intensity of these practices escalated with access. Those who reached higher ranks encountered rites that tested their emotional and physical endurance, demanding unwavering faith and discretion. These hidden ceremonies were never meant for public eyes, yet fragments of their existence survive through fragmented letters, foreign accounts, and archaeological hints. The combination of secrecy, psychological manipulation, and sacred authority created an environment where scandal and exploitation were inevitable, yet rarely challenged. It is precisely this environment that allowed the Phoenician clergy to execute acts that were at once revered and feared, leaving behind a legacy of silence and hidden horror. Now, as we consider the magnitude of these secret rituals, I want to hear from you. What do you think these hidden ceremonies reveal about the true nature of ancient spiritual authority? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and it can uncover questions that history itself has left unanswered. Were these acts devotion, cruelty, or a complex mix of both? Let's start a conversation. Your comments, your engagement, and your reflections bring these lost narratives back into the light. The hidden truths of the Phoenician temples are only as powerful as the attention we give them, and what comes next will challenge everything we think we know about sacred authority and clandestine practices. Beyond the veiled ceremonies and clandestine punishments, the Phoenician temples concealed a network of influence that reached into the highest echelons of society. The priests did not operate merely as spiritual guides. They were architects of power, weaving their authority into the political, economic, and social spheres of the cities they served. Through subtle coercion, whispered threats, and the strategic withholding of sacred knowledge, the clergy controlled the behaviors and decisions of rulers, merchants, and even families who relied on their favor. 2. Outsiders, the temples appeared as centers of learning and devotion, but within, a shadow economy of secrets and unspoken rules governed the fate of individuals and communities alike. The scandals involving the temple authorities often centered on abuses of this authority. Priests manipulated promises of divine favor, blessings, or protection to coerce loyalty, enforce obedience, or punish dissent. Families who failed to meet expectations might find themselves ostracized, their offerings questioned, or their children subjected to rituals that tested their endurance and submission. These acts were rarely recorded in official accounts, leaving only whispers among those who survived to tell of what they witnessed, and fragments of text, inscriptions, or foreign commentary to hint at the reality of what transpired. The careful orchestration of these abuses allowed the temple leadership to maintain an outward appearance of sacred propriety while secretly enforcing compliance and fear. Inside the temples, the hierarchy ensured that scandals remained contained. Lower-ranking priests and initiates were both instruments and witnesses, bound by secrecy and ritualized discipline. The higher clergy could exploit this dynamic, creating an ecosystem where fear, reverence, and ambition intersected. Conflicts among the clergy themselves, rivalries, covert alliances, and power struggles further complicated the hidden landscape. Missteps were punished through subtle but devastating methods. Exclusion from sacred rites, symbolic acts of humiliation, or manipulated rumors designed to damage reputations and ensure compliance. These covert mechanisms of control reinforce the social and spiritual order while leaving outsiders oblivious to the intricate network of power operating behind closed doors. The most shocking aspects of these abuses, however, were not always physical or overt. Psychological manipulation was equally pervasive, shaping perception, belief, and behavior. Over time, initiates learned that questioning authority could bring unseen consequences, that loyalty required unwavering adherence to secret knowledge, and that mistakes were never forgotten, even if unspoken. The combination of these strategies created a system in which the clergy could orchestrate obedience, manage dissent, and enforce compliance without ever drawing attention. It was a sophisticated method of control, one that blurred the line between spiritual devotion and human exploitation, and it set the stage for the extreme practices and hidden scandals that would later shock even those who were fully initiated. As we continue, these layers of authority and manipulation reveal just how far the Phoenician clergy could extend their influence, bending both belief and behavior to maintain supremacy. Understanding this complex web is essential because it highlights the ways in which sacred power can be wielded to conceal, control, and corrupt, creating a foundation for the clandestine rituals and punishments that shaped the secret life of the temples. As the veil of secrecy grows thinner, the hidden cults within the Phoenician temples come into sharper focus, revealing practices that were as extreme as they were deliberate. These rites, reserved for the most trusted initiates, combined elements of physical endurance, psychological challenge, and symbolic suffering, creating a controlled environment where the boundary between devotion and punishment was deliberately blurred. Participation was not optional. Every movement, every chant, every gesture was scrutinized, measured, and interpreted as evidence of fidelity to the temple hierarchy. Failures were not merely noted, they became lessons, quietly enforced to preserve the authority of the clergy and maintain the sanctity of the hidden order. These clandestine ceremonies often involved tests of endurance designed to humble and discipline, ranging from extended fasting to silent vigils in near darkness, where participants confronted their own fears and vulnerabilities under the watchful gaze of higher-ranking priests. The intensity of these practices created a psychological framework that conditioned obedience and devotion, teaching initiates that the sacred and the secret were inseparable. Every trial reinforced a strict hierarchy. Those who endured gained access to greater knowledge and influence, while those who faltered were quietly marginalized, their failures reinforcing the power of the priests over the collective consciousness of the temple community. Sacrifices, both symbolic and literal, played a central role in these rituals. Offerings were made to the gods, yes, but they also served as instruments of authority, marking those who had proven their dedication and those whose loyalty remained suspect. Individuals were often subjected to intricate rites of purification, which included periods of isolation, enforced confession, and the performance of rituals that demanded both precision and unquestioning compliance. In these controlled spaces, the line between devotion and suffering was intentionally obscured. The spiritual elevation promised by the rites was inseparable from the psychological pressure exerted on participants. The clergy wielded this tension to maintain cohesion, suppress dissent, and reinforce the absolute authority of the temple hierarchy. Beyond the initiates, the reach of these secret practices extended into the wider community. Families of participants, local officials, and even allied rulers were subtly influenced by the hidden knowledge and invisible authority maintained by the priests. Rewards and punishments, though often symbolic, were carefully calibrated to demonstrate the consequences of loyalty or defiance. In this way, the rituals became instruments of social control, their effects radiating outward from the temple chambers to shape the behavior and expectations of those who interacted with the sacred institution. The cult's hidden power was not merely spiritual, It was political, psychological, and meticulously maintained. These extreme practices, hidden from public view, illustrate the lengths to which the Phoenician clergy would go to ensure the fidelity of both individuals and communities. By combining rigorous discipline with clandestine ritual, the temples became centers where obedience, fear, and devotion were inseparably intertwined, laying the groundwork for scandals and abuses that were meticulously concealed. As we move deeper into this shadowed history, we will witness the astonishing extremes of these secret rites and the profound impact they had on those who experienced them, setting the stage for revelations that would shock even the most initiated members of the sacred order. As we proceed deeper into the clandestine operations of the Phoenician temples, the moral collapse within these sacred walls becomes increasingly apparent. Behind the grandeur of ceremonial rites and sacred symbolism, rivalries festered among the clergy, transforming the temples into arenas of hidden conflict. High-ranking priests maneuvered in secret, leveraging forbidden knowledge, manipulating initiates, and enforcing loyalty through fear and carefully orchestrated punishment. In this shadowed environment, scandals multiplied, yet they remained invisible to outsiders, carefully concealed by layers of ritual, secrecy, and social intimidation. The most disturbing aspect of these concealed practices was how easily sacred authority was distorted for personal gain. Priests who held high positions could manipulate novices, selectively interpreting sacred texts or ritual requirements to target individuals for humiliation, isolation, or subtle harm. The victims, often young initiates or lower-ranking attendants, had no recourse. Their obedience was not just expected, it was demanded, reinforced by the omnipresence of surveillance, secret witnesses, and the knowledge that even the smallest misstep could have long-term consequences. Through this system, the clergy maintained absolute control over the lives, thoughts, and behaviors of those under their spiritual authority, all while preserving the appearance of divine legitimacy. Conflict within the hierarchy further exacerbated the hidden chaos. Alliances were forged and broken in secrecy. Favoritism and vendettas were exercised under the guise of sacred duty. Initiates observed patterns, learned who could be trusted, and saw firsthand the devastating impact of being on the wrong side of temple politics. Even minor errors in performance or perceived failures of devotion could be manipulated to ruin reputations, displace aspirants from coveted positions, or subtly undermine the stability of entire temple factions. Within this web of manipulation, the sacred and the profane were inseparably intertwined, and what outsiders saw as solemn devotion masked a complex network of power struggles and clandestine punishments. The consequences of these practices extended beyond the walls of the temple. Families, local rulers, and allied communities were indirectly affected, often unwittingly, by the influence exerted by the priesthood. Decisions in civic, social, and political life were subtly guided by the threat of spiritual reprisal or the promise of divine favor, ensuring compliance and extending the reach of the temple's secret power. The combination of clandestine rituals, hiddens, rivalries, and external influence created an environment where moral corruption thrived, yet was cloaked in sanctity, leaving very few witnesses who could accurately report what transpired. Now, I want to hear from you. Considering everything we've uncovered about these hidden scandals and secret abuses, what do you think was the most disturbing aspect of the Phoenician temple's hidden hierarchy? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss how power, secrecy, and ritual combined to create a system that was nearly invisible, yet profoundly controlling. Your reflections help bring these forgotten narratives to light, sparking conversation and understanding. Every comment builds the connection between the past and the present, revealing how these shadowed histories continue to fascinate and warn us. What's your take? Don't hold back. Your perspective matters as we move forward into the next layer of secrecy and revelation. Beyond the temple walls, the hidden scandals of the Phoenician clergy extended into the broader political and social landscapes of the Mediterranean. The priests were not isolated figures performing rituals in seclusion. They were active players in a complex web of alliances, influence, and manipulation. Kings, merchants, and city officials often relied on the temple's council, giving the clergy indirect control over civic decisions, trade regulations, and even military actions. In many cases, these interactions were carefully orchestrated, designed to ensure that the power of the temple remained unchallenged and its secrets well protected. The influence of the clergy was subtle but pervasive, extending far beyond the visible walls of sanctuaries and courts. the wider society often remained unaware of the true nature of the temple's authority. Official histories celebrated the Phoenician temples as centers of learning, culture, and spiritual guidance, yet they concealed a darker reality. Reports of manipulation, coercion, and secret punishments were omitted from the public record, creating a facade of sanctity. Outsiders only glimpsed fragments of these activities: foreign envoys' letters, secondhand accounts, and archaeological clues hinting at rituals and punishments that were never meant to be revealed. These fragments, though incomplete, suggest a system that balanced public respectability with internal control, a duality that allowed the temples to maintain both reverence and fear simultaneously. Merchants and rulers who engaged with the temples found themselves navigating a subtle yet unyielding network of influence. Offerings, favors, and symbolic gestures were not purely spiritual acts. They were mechanisms to reinforce obedience and secure compliance. Failure to participate appropriately could result in social, political, or economic repercussions that were indirect but highly effective. Through these channels, the clergy exerted authority not only over initiates within the temple, but also over entire communities and external stakeholders, shaping behavior without ever lifting a hand in overt violence. It was a power exercised through perception, expectation, and the strategic withholding of sacred knowledge. The political dimension of the temple's hidden power also reinforced internal hierarchy. Priests who demonstrated skill in leveraging external influence gained prestige and protection within the temple, while those who mismanaged their external networks risked marginalization or secret censure. This dynamic created an ecosystem where competence, loyalty, and discretion were valued above all, and where scandal, if it emerged, was swiftly contained or redirected. Initiates learned that understanding the broader influence of the temple was as important as mastering the rituals themselves, revealing a sophisticated system in which social, spiritual, and political control were intertwined. By understanding the mechanisms of external influence, we begin to see how the Phoenician temples maintained a veneer of order while hiding practices that were scandalous and extreme. The ability to manipulate perception and exert control over outsiders allowed the clergy to protect their secrets, enforce loyalty, and extend their authority far beyond the temple precincts. These hidden networks of power demonstrate that the most shocking scandals were not confined to internal rituals alone. They were embedded in the very structure of society, ensuring that the temple's dark legacy would persist unseen, shaping lives and decisions in ways that remained invisible to the world at large. As modern scholars attempt to reconstruct the hidden practices of the Phoenician temples, they confront a fragmented history shaped by secrecy, deliberate erasure, and the passing of centuries. Archaeological evidence, once overlooked or dismissed, now reveals subtle traces of rituals that were never intended for public knowledge. Inscriptions carved into stone, remnants of ceremonial tools, and unusual architectural designs suggest a world in which secrecy was as integral to religious life as prayer or sacrifice. These discoveries illuminate the meticulous planning and extreme discretion exercised by the clergy, showing that the most scandalous practices were concealed not only from the public but from many within the temple itself. Fragments of written accounts, often recorded by foreign visitors or adversaries, provide glimpses of rituals that combined spiritual devotion with coercion, punishment, and hierarchy. These documents, though incomplete and occasionally biased, hint at ceremonies that tested endurance, enforced silence, or required symbolic acts of submission. Initiates and lower-ranking priests were both participants and witnesses, bound by oaths and the threat of reprisal. The secrecy of these events ensured that abuses remained invisible to official record keepers, while simultaneously reinforcing the absolute authority of the higher clergy. Through these mechanisms, the temples preserved their power and protected their most sensitive practices from exposure. Interpreting the archaeological and textual fragments presents a challenge. Each clue must be analyzed within its cultural, religious, and social context. Researchers must distinguish between symbolic representation and actual practice, ritualized punishment and spiritual discipline, myth and documentation. Even minor details, a scratch on a ceremonial object, the alignment of an altar, the inclusion of rare or forbidden ingredients, can suggest layers of hidden meaning and concealed activity. The process of piecing together these fragments is akin to assembling a puzzle with missing pieces, yet each discovery brings us closer to understanding the full scope of the temple's secretive operations. Through this painstaking reconstruction, it becomes clear that the Phoenician clergy operated a dual system of control. Outwardly, they maintained the image of piety, cultural refinement, and religious authority. Inwardly, they managed a network of influence, hierarchy, and hidden discipline designed to preserve obedience and secrecy. Even after centuries, these revelations challenge conventional understandings of ancient spirituality, forcing historians to acknowledge the extraordinary lengths to which religious leaders would go to maintain power. Scandals that were once buried now emerge in fragments, painting a picture of a world where devotion, fear, and manipulation were inseparably intertwined. As we explore these reconstructed secrets, the implications extend beyond the past. Understanding the clandestine practices of the Phoenician temples sheds light on the dynamics of power, authority, and secrecy in human institutions, revealing patterns that echo across time and cultures. These hidden histories remind us that the most shocking abuses are often invisible, maintained through discipline, silence, and the careful shaping of perception. As the layers of the Phoenician temples are uncovered, we gain not only knowledge of ancient scandals, but also insight into how secrecy, ritual, and authority continue to influence societies even today, preparing us for the final revelations that will uncover the lasting legacy of these hidden practices. As we reach the final revelations of the Phoenician temple's hidden practices, the full weight of their secretive power comes into focus. The accumulated influence of the clergy, spanning hidden rituals, political manipulation, and psychological control, created a legacy that was carefully buried but never entirely erased. Archaeological traces, fragmented records, and subtle architectural cues all point to a system in which obedience, fear, and devotion were inseparably linked, a network designed to maintain authority and conceal scandal across generations. These layers of secrecy remind us that the most impactful abuses often operate in plain sight, unseen and unchallenged, leaving only subtle marks for those willing to investigate. The culmination of these hidden practices reveals a sophisticated approach to controlling human behavior. The higher priests managed to intertwine devotion with discipline, ensuring that every ritual, every punishment, and every carefully maintained secret reinforced the temple's overarching authority. Individuals subjected to these systems internalized compliance as a measure of survival, while outsiders were subtly influenced by the reach of the clergy's power in political, social, and economic spheres. Even the most devout could not escape the web of control, as the lines between spiritual enlightenment and psychological manipulation were intentionally blurred. The Phoenician temples were not merely places of worship. They were centers of absolute power, where sacred authority and clandestine influence intersected. This understanding reframes the scandals that were once hidden. Sacrifices, secret, punishments, and coercive rituals were not isolated events. They were integral components of a system designed to consolidate control, maintain hierarchy, and protect the temple from exposure. The consequences extended far beyond the walls of the temples, influencing families, civic leaders, and even regional politics. The hidden legacy of these practices demonstrates how deeply secrecy, ritual, and authority can shape societies, leaving a mark that persists long after the original actors have vanished. History often records what was visible, but the most shocking truths are preserved in silence, in shadows, and in the subtle signs that scholars are only now beginning to decode. If you've stayed with me until this point, it's clear that these hidden scandals of the Phoenician temples are not merely historical curiosities. They are profound lessons about power, secrecy, and the consequences of control. I encourage you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you can continue uncovering stories that the world tried to bury. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts, perhaps saying something like, "I stayed with this until the end," or "This message resonates with me," so we know who is truly engaging with these hidden histories. Don't forget to like the video, as each interaction helps bring forgotten stories back into the light. And while you're here, there's a video next to this one that delves even deeper into ancient scandals and secret rituals. Click and continue exploring the shadows with me, because the past always has more to reveal than what we think we know.